I want to welcome Ganesh Iyer, who is the CEO of Mphasis, an IT services company, and also Kartik Hosanagar, who is a professor of operations, information, and decision here at Wharton. Thanks for joining us today for this conversation about how CEOs and other top officials can get the digital skills they need to lead their companies in the new digital age. Ganesh, let's start with you. Some of observers note that CEOs don't necessarily have to have all the technical skills that their technical staff has, obviously, but they have to at least be comfortable with IT and with digital topics. But the question is, how do they get that information? How do they pick it up? Is this knowledge best to come in, say, through mentors? Is it learning through experience? Who can train the CEO to be a digital leader today?
A very interesting question, and let me kind of draw upon my own experience. When digital kind of started coming through in the industry, some people see it as a disruption, some people call it revolution. As a CEO, I took a step back and I said, am I the right person to lead this company in the digital world? We are in IT services, clearly at the bleeding edge of digital. So I decided that despite me being 54 years old and 30 years in the industry, that cannot be the baggage. That cannot prevent me from learning and picking up these skills. And I felt compelled that as a CEO, I need to learn so that I can work with my team to take Mphasis in the digital era, if I may. So I went and spoke to educators, people like Kartik, understood their point of view. I went to startups. Amazing work is being done by youngsters. They are challenging status quo, innovation. Their language is different. The way they think is very different. Of course, you have forums where people come and talk about digital pure plays, and you get to learn. I went to conferences which are actually meant for really young people because I wanted to experience what goes on in the real world. So that's how, from books is a good source of knowledge, but it doesn't give you that vibrancy because it is a kind of, there is no interaction. But talking to people who are both practitioners and professors, young people. So I had to lower my ego. I had to be prepared to fail. And I had to admit that I need that knowledge. And that source of knowledge can be anywhere. And I need not feel like a CEO that I cannot go and learn from somebody down below in the organization, youngster, or these conferences. And that helped me a lot.
Kartik, what's been your experience? How do you find that CEOs are getting their information, or how should they be going about it?
Yeah, first of all, I appreciate the nod to professors very much. But I think Ganesh's answer really resonates with me as well. I think what is important first and foremost is for leaders to be open to learning and have that attitude of exploration and trying to acquire new knowledge. I think they do need mentors, especially analog CEOs that are trying to make this transition. They do need mentors, and those mentors may be within the organization. For example, to include your CTOs and CIOs in key strategic discussions and conversations. But they can also be from outside, and Ganesh mentioned startups. And it's actually a very helpful exercise for very traditional analog CEOs to be actively following that industry, to perhaps even actively participate in that. We see many companies have corporate venture capital divisions through which they partake in the startup activities as investors, and sometimes they invest in opportunities that even appear competitive to what they're doing. But that's a way to learn, that's a way to stay relevant, and that's a way to be able to respond when the time is right to do that.
Finding mentors and sources of information, but after that, it's still up to you, up to CEOs to sort through all of that noise and figure out what's best for the company. CIO can help you, but ultimately the decision rests with the CEO. So how do you do that? How do you sort through that information after listening to your mentors and listening to your technical staff? How do you make your way through all of that?
Just one point about technical stuff, because I think the world has misunderstood that digital is about technology. I believe digital is about business. And technology enables the business, so the distance between technology and business is blurring now. It has become integral. So to that extent, if I just rely on my CIO or technical staff to give me advice about digital, I would be probably not doing the right thing by just relying on that information. Now, coming to your question, how do I separate music from noise? How do I convert my knowledge or experience into something useful for the company? I watched this video which was very fascinating, which talks about why do you exist, what do you do, and how you do, these three circles. As long as you are clear as to why do you exist, and that why is not generating shareholder returns, because I think that is a very common term. People say, why do you exist? Or my job is to generate shareholder returns. That's true of every company. You have to talk about what is the value that you bring to your customers, your employees, and the society at large. So why do you exist? If you visit that and think about your vision and mission statement, that's a very telling thing. And when you look at it, lots of ideas come flooding to you. You don't feel constrained by how you operate today, because you start thinking completely fresh. And I had the advantage, because our vision and mission is so clear as to why we exist. That became my guiding principle, and that helped me to separate music from noise. And second thing which helped me is, as this disorientation is happening, the axis which I'm hanging on to is my customer. Because ultimately my job is to make my customer successful. So if you hang on to your customer and make sure that you are closely knit with your customer, that gives you that axis of stability. So these are the two things which have guided me. And time would tell whether that has I become successful in it or not. I'm just sharing how I approached it personally.
Kartik, the CEOs are looking at all of these sources of information, making decisions such as Ganesh is talking about. But at the same time, they are trying to focus on their business. It's great if your mission is very clear, but they're looking at the cloud, they're looking at mobile, they're looking at all these things, and it does get confusing. What's your advice on how they could separate the noise from the music?
I think there is certainly going to be a temptation to adopt the next buzzword in your organization. If everyone else is going on the cloud, I need to be on the cloud. If everyone's on mobile, I need to be on mobile, and so on. And that's going to be more so true, I think, where the CEO feels less and less comfortable with, with their knowledge of the digital domain. And I think I go back to what Ganesh was saying, that it's not really important or necessary for us, the CEO, to be a technologist. Really, digital transformation is not fundamentally about digital. It's about digital being an enabler of a business mission or a strategy. And so I think at the end, CEOs have to understand technology to the extent of knowing what it can or cannot enable. And once you understand what technology can or cannot enable, that is a secondary consideration, and the primary consideration is what does your customer want, and are you able to deliver unique value? And I think when you pair the two together, I think that's where they can succeed. But I think to your point about there being a lot of noise, I think in this kind of an environment, I feel business leaders have to also accept that there will always be a certain amount of noise in the market and in the landscape, and they have to be willing to take a few more risks than usual because of that.
I completely agree. I think we need to be prepared to fail.
Right, exactly.
Because as you get to the position of CEO, one of the things which happens to CEOs is they are very afraid of failure, because they are worried about their public face. You have reached that height, and the fall can be huge. And we need to overcome that fear. And that's when you will try, And when you try 10 things, it's okay if you fail in 3. As long as you fail early, you cut your losses, it's okay. But not trying is not an option, at least in my mind.
I think that is so important today because, I've worked with many companies and I've always noticed there is this tendency, as you said, the higher you are, the more fear you have of falling from that height. And I think there is this tendency among a lot of companies to be more risk averse and manage everything around what can go wrong as opposed to what's the opportunity. And I think and that's why startups sometimes can pursue those big opportunities because they're not as worried. But I think CEOs need to adopt or embrace failure as a natural part of innovation.
So a lot of top leaders also recognize that they need to do this digital transformation in order to protect themselves from pure plays or startups and that sort of thing. How can leaders actually protect themselves, perhaps impossible to do completely, but protect themselves as best they can from so-called asymmetrical challenges and bolts out of the blue, those kinds of things? People used to talk about being Amazoned, back in the dot-com era. Everyone's worried about being Amazoned, the way Amazoned the booksellers. So can you prepare? What's the best that you can do in that realm?
At least the mindset that I carry, that I don't have to worry about protecting myself. I have to focus on attacking. Because attack is the best form of defense. I see digital as a huge opportunity for IT services company. I see that as a huge opportunity for Mphasis. I see this as a shuffling of the deck. And if we do the right thing, we will come on top of the deck. So I don't worry about protecting. I think about what is the advantage that I have versus pure play. And I want to leverage that advantage in this new world of digital. Of course, I have to deal with the challenge of duality. I'm not going to give up on my analog overnight, being a listed company, and yet I have to adopt digital. That duality is an additional burden that an organization like mine carries. But comes with the duality certain strengths. If I have worked with a customer for the last 12 years, and they trust our brand, they believe that we care about their success, a new player who comes in, despite being glamorous, will have to prove themselves. And if I can leverage that inherent brand value, that's something they don't have. So I think about becoming an asymmetric attacker rather than defending myself from asymmetric competition. And the second point which I want to make in all this, of course CEOs get either slaughtered or glorified, but none of this is possible if you're not taking the entire village with you. Success can never be achieved alone, especially if you're a listed company CEO. You need to find the board who is supportive, who is willing to be the challenger, who is willing to back you. You need to have a leadership team which believes that they want to change as well to be successful, because what's in it for me is a question which all of us ask, including the CEO. So these are the factors that you have to keep in view while you're trying to transform the organization and injecting the excitement that we are going to win, and we are going to win big.
So Kartik, the best defense is a good offense. Do you agree with that? And what would you add to it, or how would you disagree?
I agree with what Ganesh said. I think I agree completely with your strategy. I'll maybe suggest a couple more tactics as opposed to an alternative strategy. I think strategically going, as you suggested, be aggressive as opposed to being defensive. So how do we do that? I think one way to do that might be to create a structure within the organization that allows you to pursue these new digital opportunities. What's going to happen is oftentimes for large, successful incumbent analog organizations, new digital opportunities may not meet your standard litmus test. Is the market size big enough? Is it meeting the needs of my current customers and so on? 5 years, 10 years down the road, it might, but not today. And so it becomes hard to pursue those opportunities in the traditional structure. So you need to create a structure to be able to pursue that. I think the second is that sometimes those opportunities will cannibalize your traditional revenue streams. And so Ganesh said you cannot ignore your analog opportunities which are delivering shareholder returns today. So again, with a more traditional format, when you're cannibalizing your cash cow, at some point you're going to say, let's shut this new opportunity. So you need to create a structure to be able to support that. One structure, which I particularly like, is where you spin off divisions. You might control them, but let them work semi-independently to be able to pursue those opportunities. And at the right time, you decide whether you kill the initiative, you let it continue in the format it's continuing, or spin it off as a separate entity, or bring it back in, and this is your new main cash cow. But I think at the end of the day, acknowledging that cannibalization is going to be the nature of digital innovation, and you have to support that cannibalization by allowing new initiatives to be independent.
Thanks to both of you for coming in today and chatting with us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.